Hi, I'm Jesse Spevack, and today we're going to look at the key elements of ancient civilizations. I want to first look at the origins of civilization, then the characteristics of civilizations. We're going to use a T-chart to help organize our thoughts, get some work time in. It's going to be great. So let's look at the origins of civilization. To do that, I think we need to look at a timeline. We mentioned this in class, but that civilization is actually a fairly recent thing. So if you took a timeline of the last 200,000 years. And I say 200,000 years because the earliest skulls, the earliest fossil record of Homo sapiens, of humans, of modern humans, dates back to about 200,000 years ago. So if you go back 200,000 years from today, you would get sort of the beginning of human history, the time where humans first started to be humans, genetically speaking. So over the course of, if this line represents 200,000 years, then to scale, if you go back 12,000 years, then that's when the Neolithic Revolution happened. And we know the Neolithic Revolution was when humans domesticated plants and animals, farming began, it was the birth of civilization. That's only 12,000 years ago, which seems like a lot, but in the grand scheme of all of human history, it's actually a very small portion of our past. And really most of our time on planet Earth, most of this time here, we existed without knowing how to farm. It's crazy. So you can go back 100,000 years ago, about half of our history, and you have the invention of tools for capturing prey, arrowheads and axes and that sort of thing. 40,000 years later, 60,000 years ago, we see evidence of the first permanent cave drawings, and then again only 12,000 years ago, which seems like a lot, but in the grand scheme of things is not that much. We have the Neolithic Revolution, the first human farmers. So let's zoom in just on this area of human history, just from the Neolithic Revolution to today, and kind of see how that breaks down. So I'm going to zoom in. Again, this is the line that represents 12,000 years ago. So 12,000 years ago, we have the Neolithic Revolution, which, as you know, is the invention of farming, the domestication of animals, and then we have 8,000 years ago, we see the evidence of writing, so using symbols to represent words and ideas. That happened 8,000 years ago. Going back 2,000 years ago, so if you go back, count back 2,000 years from today, you would see Romans walking around. That was the time of the Roman Empire. It was the beginning of the Common Era. Typically, when we give dates, we either say BCE, before Common Era, or CE, Common Era. And so before 2,000 years ago, that's the beginning, that's the before the Common Era, BCE, and after 2,000, and more recently than 2,000 years ago is the Common Era, CE. So this year is 2011 CE. Now if you go back 235 years on this timeline, just this little bit of space on this whole grand scheme of civilization, 235 years ago was 1776. That's when the United States came about. So you can see that the U.S. seems really old, but it's actually quite young. And when you think about Romans, that was even longer ago, but in the grand scheme of civilization, that's actually fairly recent. This is how much time has elapsed between today and the time of Romans. And this is the amount of time that elapsed between the invention of farming and the Romans. So really we're talking about a very small time period in the grand scheme of all of human history. So this timeline fits into this little area here. It's crazy. It's mind-blowing. If your mind hasn't been blown just now, you have no imagination. Okay. So let's move on and let's look at the Neolithic Revolution. And we talked about how there were geographic factors that came into play here, things things about the land and things about the climate that made it possible for humans to develop farming and to develop civilization. So number one, obviously rivers. You got to remember ancient river civilization, ancient river valleys. If there wasn't access to water, then the ancient humans wouldn't have a way to water their crops. They wouldn't have a way to trade, to travel. Water was super important. So you need to have rivers. That's one. Number two, you need to have climate, a mild climate. So what does that mean? That means it's not too hot, it's not too cold, it's just right. You're not going to have a thriving ancient civilization in the Arctic. It's just too cold. just like you won't have an ancient civilization in the middle of a desert without any water where it's too hot. Last piece is you need fertile soil. You need good soil for farming. And when we look at the Nile River and when we look at Mesopotamia and the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, we know that those rivers flooded and they deposited silt on the riverbanks. Silt is this very fertile, nutrient-rich soil that would stay behind once the waters receded and went back to the river. And because of the silt, the soil around those rivers, around the Tigris, Euphrates, around the Nile River, were very conducive to farming. So those are the three geographic factors that help bring about the Neolithic Revolution: rivers, mild climate, and soil. You need to have those things in order to have civilization. So let's talk about the characteristics of civilizations. First, we have cities. So one indicator, one thing that makes a civilization and not just a bunch of humans gathered around, is the idea of a city. And we're not just talking about a village or a big group of people living together. We're talking about a center of trade. That means that people from the outside areas come in to trade goods. And interestingly enough, more and more, as time has gone on, more and more people live in cities and not in farms, and that's sort of been a trend for human history. So civilization means that there are cities. The next thing, the next characteristic, is a specialization of the workforce. So what does that mean? It means that there are new types of professions. It means that in the past, when everyone was either a hunter or a gatherer, now you can sort of specialize. You can be a farmer. You can be a priest. You can be a potter. You can be a blacksmith. You can be some sort of artisan that makes jewelry. And the reason that you can do that is because all of a sudden there's a surplus of food. And the farmers are able to grow enough food for some people to spend their time not just on farming and collecting food, but on other things, weaving clothes as an example. So if you, in order to have civilization, you need to have this surplus of food, which can lead to work specialization and trade. So the next characteristic of civilization is institutions. So what do I mean by institutions? We're talking about government, religion, law, and the example that's probably clear and most important for you to know is the Code of Hammurabi. And the Code of Hammurabi, I should probably put that in here, yeah. So the Code of Hammurabi was a set of laws, Hammurabi, in ancient Mesopotamia, and Hammurabi was a king in Mesopotamia, and he wrote down a set of laws that would govern his kingdom. And this is the first time, this is the oldest example of written law that we have on the books. And here it is, the Code of Hammurabi. It's really serious. In addition to institutions like government and religion, another characteristic of civilization is writing. And this kind of looks like the Code of Hammurabi because it's written in the same language, and that language is cuneiform. And the way that they wrote cuneiform was by taking a clay tablet and pressing a stylus, kind of like an ancient pen, into the tablet, and they would write that way. You also have obviously the example of the Egyptians and the ancient hieroglyphics, which is now spelled correctly. But the hieroglyphics are those famous Egyptian paintings you saw them before, and they are also an indicator of civilization. Next, we have technology. Civilizations produce technology, and that technology is just the application of science and discovery. So these are things as simple as plow, which was a huge deal, to pyramids and ziggurats. Ziggurats are kind of the equivalent of pyramids in Mesopotamia. It's this huge brick structure used in the religions of ancient Sumeria. So those are examples of really advanced technology dating back to many, many, many thousands of years ago. We still don't exactly know how they built the pyramids. We can guess, but it's still kind of mind-boggling that so long ago they were able to build such a huge structure. Okay, so what you're going to do is read two articles. The first one is called How Civilizations Developed, and the second one is The Emergence of Civilization. And what you're going to do is complete the T-chart. You're going to draw a T-chart in your notes, And on the left-hand side, you're going to put features of a civilization, and on the right-hand side, you're going to put evidence and examples. And what you need to do is go through the rating and identify features of civilization, the things that I was just talking about, things like cities, like specialization of the workforce, like institutions, like writing, technology, and then list evidence and examples of those features. This is very important. This is going to help you make this concept of civilization more clear for yourself. It's going to help you process it. So let me give you an example of exactly what I'm looking for so that you know what to do. So here's our first article. At the top of the article, it's called How Civilization Develops. So bear with me, I'm just going to read it really quick. Most historians believe that one of the first civilizations arose in Sumer. Sumer is located in Mesopotamia, a region that is part of modern Iraq. A civilization is often defined as a complex culture with 5 characteristics. 1. Advanced cities. 2. Specialized workers. 3. Complex institutions. 4. Record keeping. And 5. Advanced technology. So, just what set the Sumerians apart from their neighbors? Advanced cities. So this is my first example, or my first feature of a civilization. So cities were the birthplaces of the first civilizations. A city is more than a large group of people living together. The size of the population alone does not distinguish a village from a city. One of the key differences is that a city is a center of trade for a larger area. So actually what I'm going to do is go to my T-chart where I have features of civilization and evidence/examples, and I'm going to put city on the left. And my example and my evidence from the article is that cities are centers of trade for larger areas. Farmers from the surrounding countryside go to cities to trade. So what you need to do is continue reading that article and the second article and complete your T-chart, and you should have at least 10 examples in your T-chart. I hope you enjoyed this mini lecture on civilizations, and I hope you enjoy the articles, and I hope you get a lot out of it. Good luck, Global History, and I will see you next time.